Welcome to Tany Talks Live Home Edition, y'all. We are doing Tany Talks Live out of the casa this afternoon. Every week, you guys pick the topics, and for this week, you guys have picked the topic of why we cry, right? I feel like for some people, it's really hard to talk about, why we cry, right? I feel like some people aren't vulnerable enough to speak about crying for some reason. I get it. Like, I think growing up, a lot of us were told not to say, not to show that we were crying, right? We were always told, oh, stop crying, be a big person and forget all about the crying. It's not that serious, so I think that has a huge effect on us as people, right? Because we have been told, you can't cry. And I just want to go out there and I just want to tell you guys that I personally cry a lot. I am a crier. I cry for everything. Let me tell you something. I cry when I'm happy. I cry when I'm sad. I cry when I'm scared. I cry when I'm frustrated. There's definitely different types of reasons to why people cry, right? So we're going to talk about it here today on Tany Talks Live. I feel like I usually have, I would say, a monthly breakdown, which is crazy because I cry like once a month. Now, I don't know if that's because I am a girly and I have like the hormones and everything going on. So, I tend to cry at least like have a breakdown like once a month. I kid you not. But I don't know if that's me or not. But I do just want to put it out there that like everyone cries. Everyone in this planet has cried before. Like, you guys have to stop making it seem like talking about crying is taboo, right? Like, I know that sometimes growing up, people have told you like they don't want to hear you cry, they don't want to hear what's going on, yada, yada, yada. But like everyone goes through it, whether they want to admit it or not. Every single person has cried in their life before. I don't want to hear that no one's cried, especially like growing up as kids, right? Like every baby cries. Like before we even able to speak and express ourselves, we were crying as kids. Like that's, as babies, that's how we communicate, right? That's how children communicate. They communicate through crying before they're able to actually express their words. And as a parent, you know that when your child cries, you know exactly for what reason they're crying for, right? They're either crying because they want your attention. They're crying because their diaper's soiled. They're crying because they want milk. They're crying because they're hot. They're crying because they're cold. They're crying because they want to stand up. They're crying because they want to sit down. Like, crying is a normal part of being a human, right? So you guys got to be okay with the fact that, we all cry. So let's talk about the different cries, right? So we have the happy cry. So I do the happy cry. I have happy cried before. One of the times where I've happy cried was in Disney World. I took my daughter, was Disneyland. I took my daughter to Disneyland, right? And I cried literally every single day at Disneyland. I kid you not. I was so freaking happy. And if anyone has ever been to Disneyland, or Disney World, that Disney is literally a magical place. So I found myself happy crying every single day when I was on vacation at Disney World, because I was just so happy, so filled with like so much emotion, right? Then there is the sad cry, which I think most people know of, which is the sad cry, right? It's the cry when like, you're not feeling the best. You're feeling down, I think that's what most people acknowledge as crying, right? And when I say cry, I don't only mean like tears coming down your eyes, right? Some people feel like, oh, you're not really crying unless there's tears coming down your face. But that's not true. Some people cry inside. Some people do the silent cry. And I know people who have done the sad cry and have done the real sad cry has freaking did the silent cry. Like, you crying so hard that you don't even make a sound. That is a real type of hurt type of cry, if you ask me, in my opinion. We've all done that very much silent cry. That cry when you cry right into the pillow. That's definitely another cry that we have experienced here. And I just want to let you guys know that if you have any experiences with crying or want to speak a little bit about crying, you can always put in the comments below, your experience with crying. And if you'd like, you can also request to join the live and explain, your experiences with crying and why we cry. So let's continue some other different types of crying, right? So we also have the scared cry. When you're so freaking scared, you start to cry. Now, I'm sure people probably have experienced this like on like roller coasters or like haunted houses, or you're about to do something that's really nervous, and it's like it causes you so much emotion it makes you want to cry. That's another type of cry. And then we have the frustrated cry, which I do a lot. I am a frustrated crier. So sometimes I get so angry and frustrated that things aren't going my way, or I'm really mad and I want to punch someone in the face. I know that I can't punch them, so I cry. So I am one of those people that do cry out of frustration, and I will just genuinely say that, you know. But I feel like the reasons in general, right, and the chemistry behind crying, I feel like is just anytime you're experiencing intense emotion to the point where for some reason it like brings tears to your eyes with so much emotion like to you, right? And that could be like extreme happiness, you know, extreme sadness, extreme if you're really super scared, if you're frustrated. And I'm sure like there's other reasons to why people cry, right? So if you guys have any other reasons to why you cry other than the ones that I've kind of already explained, you guys could let me know down below, because I'm sure I'm missing out on some other reasons to, you know, why people cry. Because, you know, everybody cries for different reasons, you know. And like I said, it doesn't mean it has to be crying out of your eyes, out of pure cryingness, you know. You can also cry silently, you know. So that's okay. I also did want to mention, you know, the different types of cry, because I feel like we have the cry where like one tear just comes down, you know, like just one, and then we have the tear where like you're crying a lot, right? And then we have another cry. I don't know if you guys have ever cried this much, but there was a time I had cried so much that like the water from my face was like trickling down into like my shirt, and my shirt was like soaked because I was just crying so hard. Like, have you guys ever cried that hard that like your shirt was soaked? Or like, have you ever felt the need to cry and you ever did the scream into the pillow cry? I feel like we've all kind of been there and done that, where we've screamed into a pillow and cried just right into a pillow. And then we also have that times where like you cry, but like you cry to a friend, right? So it's like a private cry. And I don't know what it is about people, but I feel like most people feel most comfortable crying. I feel like most people feel comfortable crying behind closed doors. I feel like a lot of people these days, for some reason, they do not for some reason they don't feel comfortable crying in front of other people. I know for me personally, I don't like to cry in front of other people too. Now, my reason behind not crying in front of other people is because I don't want them to see weakness within me, right? So I feel like for some reason when we cry and other people see us cry, they label us as weak or something of the sort, right? Which I don't think is always true. You don't have to be a weak person to cry. I mean, to be honest, in order to cry in front of others, I think you might actually be an extremely strong person, where you're not worried about the external, you know, you're not worried about the external consequences of crying, what other people are thinking, right? In order for you to be so strong to cry in front of people, you're number one, are either so hurt that you don't even realize that you're around a whole bunch of other people, right? Or number two, you just don't care about what other people think of you, that, you know, you're willing to express your emotion before you acknowledge the fact that there's others even watching. So for me personally, I think that if you cry, you are really considered a super strong individual, right? Because I feel like most people cry behind closed doors. Then there are those people who cry behind closed doors, you know, and then all of a sudden make it seem like they're okay, you know. And a lot of the times when we cry, we have to like push past that, because there's also things going around us that we just can't be sitting there crying, right? Like there are times where I'm sure like artists and people who perform, right, are going through things in their lives, and they're like behind stage and they're sitting there crying. They're either crying because they're going through something, they're crying because they're scared, they're crying probably because they're so happy that it's finally happening. But then guess what? You have to go out there and you have to perform, and you cannot cry and perform at the same time, right? So there are times where we want to cry, where we really can't cry. Like right now is not the time or the place to cry. And I think it takes a really strong person to kind of acknowledge that, right? Because sometimes people cry in situations where they're not even really supposed to be crying. You know what I mean? Like they're crying because they're scared or something like that, or they have a performance and they're an artist and they're crying backstage, like you gotta wipe your tears and get back on stage and act like it didn't happen. You know what I mean? So there are times where we're not allowed to cry, like, you know, where we have to kind of shake it off and then move forward. You can cry about it later, you know what I mean? But for like artists and people like that experience those types of things, they can't cry at a certain moment. And then again, I feel like there are certain times where you should cry, right? Like certain times where crying is valid. For instance, if you're in a funeral, that is 100% okay to be a place to cry. You know what I'm saying? That's definitely not a place to be arguing, fighting, and doing none of the sort. That is the one place where you can sit down and cry and understand why people are crying when someone is at a funeral, right? You know, that is another reason why we cry. We cry sometimes because it's a form of grieving, a form of moving on, right? We cry when we're trying to move on from like relationships and things like that. Sometimes you cry because, you know, you're gonna miss the relationship or whatever it was, but you have to move on, right? So we are all human beings and we all cry, whether it's for different reasons, right? Whether it's a happy cry, whether it's a sad cry, scared cry, or a frustration cry. But everyone cries. I think that is literally why we have tear ducts like in our eyes, because as humans, we all cry. And I feel like for some reason, when it comes to gender plays a huge role on crying. For some reason, like girls have a reason to cry and then boys have a reason to cry. And there are two different reasons why boys and girls would cry, right? So I think that that's something we're definitely going to get into and we're going to talk a little bit about. But before we continue with that, what we're going to do is we're going to go on one of our musical breaks at Tany Talks Live. Again, this is the home edition where I'm doing it from home and not from the radio station. So what we're going to do is play some songs by Josh DWH, my boy Josh. If you guys don't know, my boy Josh did pass away. You know, he was an artist, so he is one of the reasons why I cry. So what I'm going to do right now is play some music by Josh DWH for the music break. So we are back with Tany Talks, and we are talking about crying and why we cry this episode 6 on Tany Talks. So let's talk about the different reasons between, right, these gender roles that we say we have going on when it comes to men crying and women crying, right? Like I feel like for some reason women are allowed to cry. We're allowed to be emotional. We are allowed to express emotion intensely, right? Like as women, we're expected to cry. For every little thing, we're expected to cry. I was looking at this video of a woman and she like got hit by something and she didn't cry. Like she barely even like moved. And I'm like, this girl is gangster. She didn't even like sweat a tear. She didn't cry. She held that in and she kept it pushing, you know? So I feel like that was really like empowering to me because I'm like, oh snap, like this girl didn't cry. Typically like girls, when things, any little inconvenience, we are expected to cry. Like even as little kids, right? When little girls go through stuff and they cry, they're like, oh, you know, they're being more babied. And little boys, when they're younger and they cry, they're like kind of like told to tough it out, right? So I feel like for some reason, I don't know who created these gender roles, but it's almost like women get a pass when they cry, right? Like, oh, she's expected to cry. Oh, that's what women do. Women cry. They do that all the time. Like, and then when a woman is considered strong and she doesn't cry, she's looked at as, oh, look, she's super strong. She's not crying. Da 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 da. So I feel like that there's really weird gender roles when it comes to crying. But when it comes to men and men crying, for some reason, it's so different. Like, if you see a man cry, you know, he's considered like super feminine or a punk or something. And I will be honest, I'm a woman and I feel like I have looked at a man weird for crying before. Like I've had a man cry and I'm like, oh, why is he crying? Like that's so like not manly, you know? So who was it that said that it wasn't manly to cry? I don't know who put that in heads and put that even in my own head, because even myself, I'm like, oh, but why is he crying? So I feel like we need to honestly give men grace and we need to give men space to cry. Because there are certain points where when you do see a man cry, then it's like, oh, it's so sweet, he's crying. Like say for instance, you know, if you saw a man crying because there was a birth of a child in his family, or if you see a man crying because, you know, his daughter graduated or his daughter got married or something like that. Now when he's crying, it's like, oh, that's so sweet, he's crying, you know, then all of a sudden he's considered, you know, masculine enough to cry. Or let's say for instance, when I get married, I personally would expect my man to cry when he sees me walking down the aisle, for instance, right? Like, if I'm walking down the aisle and my man is not crying at the sight of seeing his beautiful wife on the other end, I'm gonna be like, why is he not crying? He should be crying right now. You know what I mean? So it's like, it's weird how women, we expect men not to cry, but at the same token, we are expecting men to cry. So it's like, what is the fine line between allowing men to cry? I feel like women get always the pass to cry, but why don't we give men a pass to cry? I feel like men should be granted just as much reason to cry than anyone else. I truly do feel that. You know, so I feel like, let's give men grace and let's give men space so they can have space to cry. Because I feel like if a man can be vulnerable enough to cry, right, we should be giving him his props. And I feel like as bros and as sis out here, we should be making sure that we're giving support to men, right? So if you see a man out there crying for whatever reason it is, do not make fun of him, bros and sis. You know what I mean? Like, why don't you give that man a pat on his back and be like, you know what? I give you all the grace you can for actually being vulnerable enough to express yourself in this way. It's clear that you're feeling an intense amount of emotion and you are now crying. You understand? So I feel like we need to offer men more space because everyone cries. Crying is normal. Stop making it seem like men crying is weird or what is weird. So I'm gonna read off one of the comments right now. It says, "Because when I cry, you cry, we cry together." Period. That's the song. Because when I cry, you cry, we cry together. I know y'all know that song. If you don't know, then you just don't know. So, but I just feel like, you know, as human beings, we should be able to cry, right? And I think there's also a stigma when it comes to children crying, right? And then adults crying, right? I feel like for some reason, children always get a pass to cry in certain stances, right? But then adults don't get a pass to cry for everything. I feel like as we get older, we are supposed to be told we got to cry less. And I don't know who told us that, but I feel like as we get older, why is it that we have to hold everything inside? You know what I mean? I feel like maybe as adults, if we cried more in society, we'll be less stressed. And that's why children probably are less stressed, because they actually have the emotional intelligence to cry and feel those emotions immensely when they do feel them, you know. But then again, granted, as we get older, we start to learn that there's a time and a place not to cry, right? So I kind of understand that. At the same token, they get it out. Yeah, you know what I mean? Like, we allow kids to cry and we allow them to be frustrated and go through their moods. It's like, oh, they're children. But for some reason, like, as adults, as we get older, right, we are told that we can't cry. And I feel like I'm going to be here to tell you guys that crying is okay. Like, if you don't feel comfortable crying in front of people, that's understandable. If you just take a step away and cry, like, behind closed doors, that's okay too. Or if you feel like, you know, you want to cry by yourself, that's cool too. Crying by yourself is cool. You know what I mean? But if you also feel like you want to cry with someone, you can always call me to cry. And I don't mean to say that like to be weird or nothing like that, but like sometimes we want to cry, but sometimes we also want to be heard, right? So I feel like we need to be able to offer one another a shoulder to lean on, because a lot of the time I feel like people feel, for some odd reason, like we are not entitled to cry or express crying to others. Like, we always have a habit of hiding it behind closed doors and doing things like that. Like, I think society needs to be more open when it comes to crying. And I feel like people have to be okay with it. Like, me personally, as I said, I cry all the time. The only time I really feel like I don't cry is for spite. And I know this might sound really crazy, but I'm one of those people that, like, I cannot cry in front of my enemy or like cry in front of a guy if he feels like he made me cry. So for instance, like, if there's someone intentionally trying to hurt my feelings, right, no matter how bad it hurts or anything like that, I will suck it up. I will eat it. I will take it to the face. You know what I'm saying? It is what it is. But I'm going to sit there and I'm going to act tough about it. Because one thing I'm not about to do is show weakness, which I don't know where I get this from, y'all. I'm saying this not like completely biased, because I cry all the time, right? I cry and I hide my cries. And sometimes I want to cry in front of people. Sometimes I don't want to cry in front of people. But let me tell you one thing. If you are sitting there with the pure intention to try to make me cry, right, I will try my mother effing best not to cry. I will sit there and I will hold it in. Or what I will do is I will try to make you cry. So don't try to make me cry, because I will try to then make you cry. And then we crying together to make it no better. You know what I'm saying? So that's just something, that's corny though. No, but I'm saying it because like, I just feel like, if you're intentionally trying to make me cry, number one, I'm definitely not going to try to cry in front of you, because I'm not going to let you feel like you won or you have an effect over my emotions like that. And if you're really trying to go that hard to make me cry, best believe I'm going to try to do something to make you cry too, because there's no way I'm going to be the only one sitting here that's feeling like it's going to cry. And I'm sorry, but I just feel like an eye for an eye. Like, you make me cry, I'm going to make you cry. That's it. Like, stop trying to hurt my feelings, you know? I wouldn't try to cry in front of that person. Granted, when I leave that particular situation, and I'm out of that situation, I will go home and cry about it probably for days. Like, oh my God, this person, I can't believe they did that. I try to hurt my feelings and make me cry. You know, but that's one of the reasons why I wouldn't cry in front of someone, right? I also would try my best not to cry if it's just not a place to cry. Like, right? If we're in a beautiful place and there's something really awesome going on, and sometimes you can't help it, right? Like, you're randomly going through things, like, especially when it's like you've experienced death, right? And I've noticed that, like, sometimes when I'm grieving, I would randomly cry at any point in time of the day. Like, it could be the middle of brunch, right? Then all of a sudden I had this like thought of the person that I missed and, you know, who's passed away, and I'm still grieving on it. I will literally sit there and cry in the middle after just laughing, taking a mimosa, like whatever. Like, I would dead start crying. And it's unfortunate. I wish I could control it, but that's one of the things that I feel like sometimes when you're getting over things and you're dealing with hurt, you know, you randomly cry out of nowhere. You know what I mean? And I feel like the people who are around you, if you speak to them about why you've been hurt or what's been going on with you lately, and you are at brunch and then you decide to cry, those people will probably know why this person's crying. Like, okay, you know, this person's family member just passed away, so now they're randomly crying, you know? And I feel like we have to cry in order to smile and laugh, right? So life is not always sunshine and rainbows, right? Yes, we do cry. But I feel like if we don't have those bad days where we sit there and we really cry it out, we then again won't be able to appreciate the good days, right? The days that we are so happy and we're laughing and we're smiling and we're giggling and, you know, we're having a good time. How are we going to really be able to appreciate those really, really awesome, amazing days when we don't experience the really bad parts of the day, right? And the sad parts of the day. Yeah, like, you know, if you're in the circle kind of knows what you're going through and, you know, you're crying out of nowhere, they probably would know why. You know what I mean? And a lot of times you could cry a pure happiness with a group of people as well too, right? Like, let's say you experience something with your friends or something like that and you're happy and you're expressing it to them and you're crying just because you're so freaking excited and you're so freaking happy. I've done that before, you know, and I've done that with my people. So I feel like the more we allow us as individuals to cry in society, the more that we'll be able to do it, because really crying is just an intense sense of emotion, right? And if you're feeling such an intense sense of emotion, that means you're human. That means you have a heart. You know what I mean? That means you are true to who you are, because I feel like some of us have never seen some people cry, but that doesn't mean that they don't cry, right? And I would say another really fun cry would be when you're watching like a sad movie. And I feel like, I don't know if you guys are one of those people, but I am. I'm a movie crier. I am a movie crier. I will watch a movie and I will cry, whether it's a happy scene, you feel me? Like Homebound, when they made it home. You know what I'm saying? I was crying in Homebound. I don't know if you guys seen, but Homebound is with the two dogs and the cat, and they were trying to get their way home. And there were so many scenes in that movie that just made me cry out of happiness and out of sadness. And I feel like, don't laugh at me, I'm serious. If you've seen Homebound, you know that movie has a lot of emotional roller coasters in it, okay? But I'm one of those people that I would cry if like a character died on a show. I would cry like if they got married and it was like so successful. Like, I'm just a crier. And I think that's why I like Sailor Moon so much too, because I don't know if you guys ever seen the anime Sailor Moon, but that girl is always crying. She's crying, she's complaining all the time, okay? So I just want to thank you guys so much for tuning in to this week's At Home Tany Talks Live and talk about why we cry. So what I am going to do is, though, I'm going to post a poll next week for Tany Talks for the next topic, and you guys let me know what you want to pick for Tany Talks Live. So I want to thank you guys so much for joining, and I wanted to remind you that crying is okay, okay? All right. You guys have a good one. Bye. Thanks for joining.